Welcome to TradingBeyond.com. This is John's reports for the 1st of June. So we finish off the month, well, not horrible. I think we're pretty equal to May began right here and literally closed slightly better. So we'll say that it was a positive month, but we know that the majority of it was spent lower and really struggling. Until we reached like that 38.50, which was the level I was looking at, that we would see some relative support, and in fact that's literally what we bounced off of, and we could see it with the magenta NBI leading going forward there. We're already seeing cyan overtaking green here, beginnings of the rollover, DOC red, right at the point where shakeout reaches zero, and that's always a critical one because you really have to see that histogram continuing a positive streak, because if it rolls over there, it usually gets pretty negative and breaks the 23%. Now, if it doesn't break down here, that becomes more bullish. So it becomes one of those slight retrace ABC kind of setups. So those are the benchmarks to look for. I think it's pretty straightforward for us. So we get the 38% at 41.22, 42.18 up there is the 50% line. We've already been battling those two, just this end of the month situation. And of course, once below that 38%, got to be looking for more bias to the short side. That will depend strictly on whether or not you see it from the 50K charts and or intraday as well. Turning to the NQ, literally identical. We'll see that if I go back to it, we're still seeing a spike of NBI magenta, and that's critical there because to have a downward weakness without that pivot lower already, it's a warning, because if we do pivot lower, fortunately it's so far at 52, that's a long way down to everything. You'd have to see a major drop off to have that become equivalent, and we're seeing the exact same thing. And again, also with orange pivoting to the upside here, as long as it doesn't pivot lower, the next critical element will be to see cyan move above zero level, of course, and steel cross below it. That would indicate more shortness. So if steel pivots up before then, be ready to flip for a nice long series. Euro, get that 50% coming off the declines, not too shocking there, and a bit overdone still. Did recover quite a bit. I mean, we dropped all the way to the 106.7 range, so that was a significant move. And from a gold standpoint, again, this is where I was talking about the market believing that the worst of inflation is behind us. And some people could make that argument. There's a whole idea of deflation because of softening economy and the Fed stopping. The problem you've got with that theory is this. We moved to 119, finally settling at 115 for oil. Fine, you can look at that and say, oh, it's a hammer, that's the end of the peak. Well, yeah, people thought that back here too. And we don't see anything changing in the global situation. The only thing that's significantly going to taper that is a big drop off in demand. This just looks ugly from an inflation standpoint. And if you get obviously weak or no growth, then you end up with exactly the definition of stagflation. You can see that big drop off in treasuries there as yields begin to climb back up as they see some of that readings from oil. And I think you're probably going to see that inverse relationship. As oil climbs, you'll see tier treasuries fall as their yield goes up because the recognition that inflation is not abating, not stopping. I mentioned the positive comments we saw from that buy signal that we developed here on Bitcoin, and proceeded to carry away with it. So it was a nice run for there. From an ETH, a lot more back and forth and a lot more considerable weakness relative to what we saw from Bitcoin. So the fact that we're seeing some divergences within those, I think is healthy, because it's an indication that they're trading more within their own merits as opposed to just a block. From the 50K, took the long setup from there and went to the short side with that briefly, and then we kind of just went back and forth. And it's pretty much energetic. As long as it stays above 50%, I think you're okay with the bullish side. But you can look at that MBI print. It's possible Magenta makes the turn up and begins to salvage it, but with that blue, probably likely to see more going across for any bullish kind of move. So I would, under these conditions, if you get down towards that 41.21, I would expect it to break down because that's bearish from there. So again, easy from an intraday. That pivot point of the 50% certainly becomes relevant as long as it stays above there. I think that the more of the bullish side has a chance to really make that move pretty darn close to having the magenta back above yellow there. Intraday started out extremely weak, and just every time we had these little pops like a white come through, very clean, and we started to build up just as the pre-market was starting, and that caught some nice little buy action in between. Still fighting with some of my code program setups within some of these softer dips that don't have the green, and it's just a matter of finalizing some of those little details. So I'm still making those adjustments on it. We did end up with a much cleaner setup as we came down. The magenta got over. Saw a little bit of weakness that could have had a potentially stronger weakness setup, but then a strong pivot back above meant that if you were still short, you could have just cleared that one out at that particular point, and then it just continued through. And green was already above even before that marking right there. Green had moved over cyan. So by the time that opened that bar, you could be thinking long setup, and that sure enough it took off. So slip that over. And then of course the weakness setups, this just becomes to be, there's two approaches you can take with this. I like to take it from a profit taking standpoint. If I potentially see weakness, and in this particular case I'm looking at rising gold, I think that any drop I'm going to get, I've got to react to quickly here because it's likely to be short-lived, and in this case exactly perfect to 50%, and then it makes that turnaround setup. Sure, they can break down, but you'd have to see red dipping below zero. In this particular case, by the time it got there, you're just at that peak, and then sure enough, a bar or two later, you get the immediate turnaround at magenta, and that's about the end of it, and green pops above and takes it right back, and then just produces the same. So this is that back and forth that we're starting to see from a much more normalized market when that happens. And so it becomes a little more concentrated and still running number of configurations as to whether or not flipping just straight to the long with that rising magenta, even if red is leading until there's that actual pivot lower, because this is the same thing happening here. You get the lead of red in that, but particularly makes difference when you get green at DOC that pops above cyan at any point in that. Usually has more bullish, and that's why this one is a little bit more convoluted, I think, in that regard. And certainly though, once the white MBI took the lead on that one and DOC spread at the same time, that combination happening at the same time together within a bar usually is pretty strong and effective. And in fact, took us all the way back to the 0%, which is what we would have expected with the white MBI lead there. So it impacted that, and of course you form your building support, and this looks pretty good for a potential pop-up this particular time. So excellent start, a lot of activity back and forth, which is good stuff, and I think that relative range indicates that volatility is not going anywhere. It's certainly not going to be the case in June. I mean, it always was sell in May and go away. It's certainly traders can't afford to do that in this case, given what we saw happen in May with the carnage over the last couple of months and where the market is, relatively speaking. So you're going to see that going back and forth. I will be off for the rest of the week, heading down to Rome and then the Amalfi Coast for a few days, but I will be back Monday, so this is just Wednesday, Thursday, Friday action. But I think you have the broadest picture of what to look for as we go forward with this, and you can look for me to be back. As always, though, trade well. We'll talk to you later.